Welcome aboard the tour celebrating our 250th anniversary of the White Oak congregation. There's a lot to take in this afternoon, and so I want to hear your stories too that come to mind as we travel. My memories don't go back quite as far as yours, so I'd like to hear some of your stories. We're going to be stopping at Grable Meeting House and Cemetery first. The Grable Meeting House will be open, so you can go in, as well as Longenecker Meeting House and the former White Oak Meeting House. When the bus arrives at these stops, quickly exit, look around inside and outside the buildings, the cemeteries, and the grounds. Make sure you know which bus you got off of so you get back on, and I'll tell you what time you need to be back on the bus. When we arrive, you have about 20 minutes to get off the bus, look around, and get back on. So we're leaving White Oak Church property now. This building was built on an 8-acre tract here of land from Ralph Meyer and Sons Farm here on Penryn Road in Manheim. Later, this tract right beside us here to our right, I believe is 10 acres, the Shelley plot, was added to it. The first service was here almost 41 years ago, 1981, October. But today we get to explore what church life looked like before that. Grable Meeting House, our first stop this afternoon, the former Grable Meeting House in Elm. It's now owned by Trinity Baptist Church, and they regularly worship here. This plot of land where Grable's is was given by Joseph Grable. He is the great-great-grandfather of Bob Sansonig, Martha Copenhaver, Mary Catherine Hernley, Gerald Meyer, John Meyer, Mim Longenecker, and a whole bunch more. This land came off the farm that is right to the south of the church, just over the hill. And when we leave there, you'll be able to see that farm where this meeting house land came from. The first house that was built, Joseph tore down one of the houses and donated the lumber to build the first meeting house in 1861. So this meeting house was not always called Grable Meeting House. Originally it was called Penville Meeting House. These buildings here, the current building was built in 1881 and it was remodeled in 1948. It also was made into a love feast house and those kinds of things. What you see today though outside is how it was when we sold it to this, when we sold it in 1981, when we no longer could fit in it and use it anymore. What John says is, John Meyer wrote some of this, and he says that the brick house next to the church was built by the grandfather of all those cousins, John and his cousins, Ferris Grable, and Sunday afternoons they would eat lunch there in that brick house and play on the church property and explore the cemetery. If you get out to the cemetery and you have time, take a look at the large tombstone of the 4 members of the Elmer Hershey family. He was a brother to the former elder in charge, Grable Hershey. Those 4 members were all killed in a train crash. Train hit their car in Lititz, February 1927. Elmer was 39 and his wife and 2 sons that were 16 and 4 years old were also killed in that crash. He was related to quite a few of the families in our congregation at that time and who have families there now. So as we're approaching here on our right, look at the red brick house. That was Ferris Grable's house. Take a look at that where John Meyer remembers eating lunch with his cousins. And then the church property on our right. It's for sale today, so if you'd like to live there, you might have an opportunity. And then the farm just over the hill here, which is where this property was came off of. So we're going to be exiting the bus here in a minute. It's 12:45, so we should be back on the bus at 1:05 and to head to our next stop. So you have about 20 minutes here to look around inside the church and outside, and then back on the bus. Thank you.
Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior
So as we're leaving Grable here, the former Grable Meeting House, you got a chance to look inside. Very different inside than from what those of you who attended there remember. The outside very similar. If you would like to know more about the Elmer Hershey family, I do have an article that was in the Lititz Record that during that time from the train accident. Let me know and I can share that with you. We're now going past the farm where Joseph Grable lived, where he donated the land came off of, and where he tore the house down and gave the lumber to build the first church house. Our next stop is going to be the Longenecker Meeting House. Takes us across the country here from Penryn to just west of Lititz, the former Longenecker Meeting House and Cemetery. This first meeting house was built on the plot of ground. It was built the same year as Kreider's. You've heard that a couple times this weekend. They built two houses in 1859, one Kreider's and one Longenecker Meeting House. This ground was donated by Christian Longenecker. He is the great-great-grandfather of Mike and Roll Longenecker. When we get to the property, the farm is just to the west of the buildings. If you remember where Carl Longenecker's farm was, it's actually across the road from that one. It was the original meeting house was built in the same exact spot, same location as the meeting house that is currently there. It was, the first one built was brick and was built in 1859. In 1912, just 40, 50 years later, they decided to build a larger brick meeting house again, and so that was built in 13, and on February 9th, 1913, that new building was dedicated. In 14, the first love feast by the White Oak congregation was held there. In that, of interest was that at that first love feast in that meeting house, 25 visiting ministers were present there for that love feast. And so it must have been a fairly notable occasion. Rotating morning worship services were held there all along until the seating capacity was outgrown in 1960. So from then on it was just used for Sunday school, and you heard them speak of that some, how Sunday school would be held at different meeting houses, and then they would travel to another meeting house for worship where they would all come together. And so Longenecker Meeting House was used for Sunday school in the 70s and in 60s and 70s, and then evening worship until it was closed in 1981 when the White Oak Church was built. This building has been sold several times since we originally sold it, and it's now owned by Evangelical Christian Baptist Church. And so there's a group of Russian and Ukrainians who worship here together at this church. So the building will be open for you to tour. Also, you can walk through the cemetery. The cemetery is large. It has, I believe, over 2,200 plots in the cemetery. It's not filled, and it is also, there is land to the west of the cemetery which has not been developed, so it could be even larger if it was ever needed to be. The Longenecker family has for years given much care to this. Carl Longenecker for many years was the head trustee here. I had that number and I do not see that in front of me now, but for many years he took care of it up until just a few years back. Over that time, Carl Longenecker himself hand dug over 200 graves in that cemetery. I believe one day he dug 2. So worked quite a bit, took care of that. His son Mike now takes care of it and has taken charge of this cemetery. So in a few moments here we'll be turning right onto Lime Rock there. Nope. Yeah. One of these roads, and then the church will be right in front of us as we approach it. Information on the Longenecker Cemetery. In the 50s and 60s, Ed Longenecker was the head trustee and treasurer. When he passed away in 65, his son Carl took over. In 66, the trustees were Carl Longenecker, Abram Longenecker, and Bob Sensenig. So, and Carl served there from 66 to 2015. And it says in my notes here that he dug over 200 graves, or about 200 graves by hand with a shovel and a pick. So he spent a lot of time in this cemetery working.
Can you say that?
So as we're leaving Longenecker property here, former Longenecker property, take a look again at the Carl Longenecker farm on the right, and then the property on the left is Christian Longenecker, I believe. Yes, Christian Longenecker farm was to our left. That was the one where the property came off of for the church and the cemetery.
That turned out now.
No, I said it's good. So moving on now, we're going to be traveling west here, west toward the Kreider Meeting House. Most of us had the opportunity last evening to worship there. The Kreider Meeting House, as we approach the Kreider Meeting House, we're not going to be stopping at the Kreider Meeting House and getting off, so we will just do a loop drive-by. Because the road is closed up ahead here, Fruitville Pike and Temperance Road, we have to do a little bit of a detour around. As we approach Kreider Meeting House, we're going to turn left into the Cedar Hollow development, loop around and see the farm where Cornelius Kreider lived, where the property came from across the road for the Kreider Meeting House. Previously, or before the Kreider Meeting House, church was held at times in this Cornelius Kreider farmhouse. It's currently owned by Gloria Burkholder. So we're going to loop through the Cedar Hollow development, drive past where church was held in the house, and then approach the Kreider Meeting House from there.
Oh, yeah.
So just take note, this was the Cornelius Kreider farm. We're driving. Jim and Lois Kime live right there on your left. We just passed it.
Look at that nice shed roof.
We're turning right here, driving past the farm buildings of the Cornelius Kreider farm.
This is the street, right?
Yes. In here on the left, former member Gloria Burkholder now lives in those buildings. The land across the road where the Kreider Meeting House and Cemetery was sold to that for the church property in 1859. It was sold off in 3 different tracts. It totals now about 2.5 acres total land with that property. The original property, 1 1/3 acres, was sold for $91.87.5.
Wow.
1859 that was, though. There was a buggy shed here on this property, and Jim the other night talked about a pump house. just the church itself is still standing. So you can see that today. The original part, I don't know if they mentioned much about that last night. We'll just stop briefly here at the stop sign. The original part of the church meeting house stopped right before that second door. If you see to the left of it, there's a seam in the brick. Yeah, so that was the original from there over. I think they added another door.
The door used to be different windows.
Yeah, the door used to be where, Sean?
The middle window.
The middle window, and so you could walk in both aisles, and the center was all one bench. And then they added the section on the end and turned it into a love feast house. And you can see in the basement where that was pieced together to make it what it is today. So the cemetery was used mainly in the late 1800s and early 1900s. I always thought that this property came off of the Charles Castle farm, which was down at the bottom of the hill, but that is not correct. It came off of the Cornelius Kreider farm instead. They baptized in the meadow there, and we saw some of that this morning. Back, if we would have been able to get the bus over the bridge through Luther's farm there, we would have went that way, and you could have seen where they baptized in the creek before they baptized in the spring, which ran through the front of the creek, front of the house. But because of the bridge not being passable for buses, we can't go past there today. So if you ever get the opportunity, just drive through there. In 1908 is when they started baptizing in the baptistry there that we saw this morning. Prior to that, they baptized in the stream. The first time they baptized in the spring was in the winter 1908, because the creek had 16 inches of ice on it. Oh. Now toward the former Manheim meeting house. This congregation first met in a union house on North Charlotte Street. The congregation then moved and shared a meeting house with the Methodist Church on West Ferdinand Street. And then they built the first place of worship here on the property we're about to drive past in 1892 on East High Street. In 1908, that original building had an addition added and remodeled, but then they tore it down and built a new one in 1949. And so the original church houses on that property were facing East High Street, so they were out by the street we're going by. The latest one that was built in 1949 was built back further, and it fronts on South Linden Street. So this was the larger of the buildings, or largest. This was the largest of all the worship houses, meeting houses for the White Oak congregation. And so when you look back through history, many of the important gatherings were held in this meeting house because it seated the most people. It was used for Sunday school and rotating Sunday morning services up until White Oak moved to its current location there on Penryn Road. This building back in 1981 was sold to another church group, and then they sold it, and now it's currently being used as a Masonic lodge, unfortunately. This property is completely off limits. Unfortunately, we cannot drive on the property or even or tour the property or the meeting house. So we're going to have to just limit ourselves to driving by, which most of us have the privilege of doing at other times. A lot of the pictures of big events like the dedication or the commissioning of the group going to Maine, I saw that was taken there, and there was other big events held there as well. Bible school was held there. We are going to be turning left here on White Oak Road shortly. Our next stop, we're traveling to the White Oak Meeting House on Newport Road. This building was built in 1915. This church building will be open for us to tour. There is a cemetery here across the road from the church that is a newer origin, is not part of our congregation. That was put in by the congregation that's there today. The congregation that currently worships here, which bought the property from us, I believe, yes, 1967, the White Oak Mennonite Church, a part of the Eastern Mennonite Conference. It's used regularly for Sunday morning services, at church services. They use it regularly. We used it regularly for Sunday morning services until 1956. And then we sold it in 67. So for 11 years there, this building was only used for evening services. I've been told that they have a handout here for us today of the history of this building as they know it. They have things there that were in the building when we sold it that will be on display as well. Take note that the front part of the building is what was original, and so they've added almost as much again to it as was there when we sold it to them. Welcome back on the bus as we head to our last and final stopping place. Notice as you look out the front of the bus here to my right, you see a red barn. In the trees is the house. That is the John Gibble farm. That is the property that had the original Gibble Church, where the Rules Methodist Picnic Grove is now, and the Gibble Cemetery way up in the back corner. So we'll be going past that farm and around the bend and then coming to the picnic grove. This was actually, I said John, maybe it was the Daniel Gibble farm. Deeded land in 1872 for the Gibble Meeting House. Supposedly you can see a spot in the front yard, I haven't seen it personally, where that meeting house was. The Gibble Family Cemetery is located up at the top northwest corner, and those of you who would like to make that 4/10 of a mile hike are welcome to do that. So the bus will be stopping here at the end of the driveway. We'll walk back up there and then come back down. The bus will swing around and pick us up in about a half an hour or a little later. So there is a lot of information. Some of you may have picked up information that Sue Shank compiled regarding this area right here, the Gibble Meeting House, the Gibble Cemetery, the farms here. This is all part of Sue Shank's ancestry. And so she'll be up here today giving, her and Marv are up here, and so they'll be giving some more information about this area while we're here.